excited.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And one of the things Eric and I were talking about when we caught up for a bit 2 weeks ago was we were joking around having almost like start off the conversation like, what are you drinking?
Right. I was trying to, for my podcast, I wanted to make sure that I had some sort of little shtick. So I was asking Jim, and Jim had some ideas, and he was saying, what are you drinking is a good one.
Have you noticed that my mug rotates every week?
I have.
I wonder if people are going to start catching on. Apparently I have a large collection of mugs in the cupboard, so I'm going to have my own dedicated coffee mug cupboard at some point. By the way, Jen, I think, is super jealous because I mentioned to her we were jumping on to record a podcast with Eric. She's like, "Oh, he's so awesome. Tell him hi."
I love Jen. The other day, she posted something about a Charles issue she was having, and she's usually the one helping me, but I jumped in and said, it's probably going to be some sort of a plug-in. And she's like, yep, you're right. It was a plug-in. VPNs will do it to you every time, and VPN plugins are really bad about that.
I've given up on trying to use Charles. For some reason, I can't make it work for me anymore. I used to have a setup where it was so good, and then something happened. And I'm like, no, I just don't have the patience to figure it out.
Phone with me. I'm a Charles whisperer, man.
Are you?
Fix it. Yes, I can fix it.
So Charles Whisperer, and what's the other topic? Data Exorcist?
Data Exorcist.
I just had to put my title in for what my title is, and I don't have one. So I chose Chief of Data Exorcist, the CDE. So
I think that works.
It does.
It does.
I think that works.
So we kind of just jumped into it. So this week I wanted to talk about data quality, and Eric and I just met. So for the benefit of our listeners, I'll share a bit more details about Eric in a minute. But he and I just met, but I know Jason, you and Jen have known him for quite some time. And from what I understand, there's probably nobody else better to talk about when it comes to talking data quality.
It's true. Yeah, Eric has a special skill set for sure. And I tweeted about it a bit. Eric and I caught up a few weeks ago, and I've really been thinking about this space and the skills that he brings. And it truly is like such a critical piece. And we all understand it's critical, but very, very few of us have the skills to do it. And honestly, very few of us have. I think the right word is patience is key. And the other part of it is just being critical of every component. Like if you need something proofread, looked over, Eric is going to find the bugs, find the issues. He hunts them down. And it is such a critical skill set that very few people have. And even if people do have it, they don't enjoy doing it. He's the one person I know that just loves doing this. So when the idea came up of having him on, I'm like, yes, we need to do this. It'll be a fun conversation.
It's funny you mention that because people sometimes will say, meaning it in a derogatory way, oh, you're so retentive. Thank you. Thank you. I try to.
Thanks for noticing. I'm glad you noticed that. No, it's true, right? And especially in data, and we have companies, and Jim, I probably shouldn't go too far down the hole here before you tee it up, but companies are spending so much money on data, it boggles my mind that we're not putting in the attention to making sure the data is right, and being so critical and being able to look at it at that level is just so important.
No, totally agree. And that's where we started off with when, after you connected Eric and I, and after that initial conversation, I foresee this becoming a bit of a series, and we'll definitely loop Jen in for subsequent episodes about it. But to your point, Jason, companies are spending so much on data, but what we've all seen is the quality of that data collected is often an afterthought, and no one really thinks about it until there's a problem, and at that point, it's too late. So that's why we wanted to chat with Eric today, based on the experience that he's had. Like I said, he definitely had me laughing when he brought up his title of Data Exorcist. I absolutely love that, and I'm going to reference it at least 3 or 4 more times before we're done today.
The chief data exorcist.
The chief data exorcist. Okay, I will correct my notes on that.
I promoted myself to the C-suite.
And Eric most recently was part of Keystone Solutions, where he was director of data quality solutions for the last 6 years. But before we dig into the topic, Eric, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been in the analytics space since 2011, as you mentioned, breaking into it with Keystone Solutions, working with some of the largest enterprise clients out there. I had everything from e-commerce to fintech to content to retail, apparel. I've done video games. I've really worked with some of the world's largest clients and worked with some of the best people in the industry. Had a lot of really good mentors along the way, Jason included. I used to report to Jason for a minute there back in the Keystone days. So yeah, I've always been focused on data quality. I've always been kind of the janitor, the cleanup guy that comes in at the end and makes sure that everything's that was going to be implemented was done correctly and without error, and just make sure that we do have a solid data integrity foundation.
So the first question that comes to mind is you mentioned that the types of companies you worked with, and obviously they had a vested interest in making sure their data was clean and correct. We tend to see companies, as Jim queued it up, as thinking of it as an afterthought. What do you see the difference between companies that you're working with that say, we're spending a lot of money on implementation, this data is critical, we're handing it over to our analysts to make key business decisions, we want to make sure it's as clean as possible. What's the difference between those companies from their state of mind versus the companies that are all, we'll throw it on the page, if it breaks, we'll address it then, or they may not even think about it until something breaks and then someone alerts them and they've now already made decisions, they've published faulty numbers, and it's an afterthought. What's the major difference between those two types of companies that you see?
Well, I see a lot of times, as you mentioned, you've got folks that'll just throw it out there and see what happens. Sometimes, to my horror, I'll see that companies will actually plan break fixes. We'll go ahead and release the analytics updates, and then come along a week or so after, once the reporting's starting to flow in, and we'll clean up any issues that we've had. As you guys know, by then the scars are already on the data. The time to make sure the data quality is good is before it goes in. If you wait till it's been released, some folks who think maybe it's just a blip on the radar and then we'll fix it later. I always say those companies are kind of doing it wrong. They need to have a solid strategy ahead of time, and they don't play catch up. And that's what I see companies who invest in the actual program management around data quality, where it's an integral piece of the overall resources. I hate that word, resources. I know you rail against it as well. But in terms of people, that you place a lot of importance on actually having a data person, such as myself, or someone who goes in and is able to look at what the business requirements say, look at what's been implemented, look at what's on the page, preferably in a lower level environment or multiple lower level environments. Throwing some process around that, where before it gets promoted into production, they've got a seal. They'll seal off all of the development cycle stops. We get some quiet code in place, test the heck out of it, and then once it's as clean as it can possibly be, or all of the bugs have been identified and triaged and fixed however they want to do it, or accepted as bugs that we'll put off into the future. Once that has been done, then you promote it into production, and it doesn't stop there. Then you have to go back in and make sure that everything made it in correctly. And I find that the companies that do it that way, that have a very lockstep promotion of code, tend to do it a whole lot better.
One of the things that I'm interested in learning from you on what you're seeing in these companies is around your specific skill set. And one of the reasons why I'm fascinated with what Eric does and why I think he's insanely valuable for any organization he works with is that we rarely see, no, I'm going to say I've never seen a company's existing QA process work with what MarTech needs. And what I mean by that is traditionally we've seen MarTech implementations go through in-house QA, and they do a fantastic job of running it through scripts, saying, is it there or not? Is the variable collected or not? And kind of giving that high level test. But what fails 100% of the time is, okay, yes, it's there, but is the data organized in such a way that aligns with our business goals? Are the data values there aligning with what our analyst is expecting? And the reason why this is so important, especially in MarTech, is companies are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing fees for these enterprise solutions, with the promise that a lot of the heavy lifting that an analyst would do is taken out of their hands. All of the data munging and cleaning is done for them. It's done either as part of implementation or part of processing done by a vendor. But if the data is not validated, then we lose that hope, we lose that promise. And I've never seen a QA organization be able to do that. It always takes someone like Eric that comes in and can not only look at it from, is it there or not, but go to the next level to say, is it there, and is it organized and collected in such a way that aligns with what our analysts expect to see? Have you seen something similar? Is that view real? So my view is obviously very narrow. I only get to see a few companies here and there, but it seems like every time I see it, that the QA team is great, but it's not ultimately giving us what I need.
Right. Great questions, great insights. You're absolutely correct. That's what I've seen as well. What you need to do is get in there and do some consulting and have QA, or me or whomever at that point will be running things, speak directly to the senior leadership, and need to stress the fact that it is important to treat QA as its own separate practice. So you've got your implementation folks, you've got your developers and your analysts and your project managers and so on and so forth, and you have your QA team or practice in place. Once you get that buy-in, and once you stress to senior leadership that you've made a significant investment, as you mentioned, in the MarTech, in the people, in the all of the things that go into collecting the data, why break down at the very tail end of it and accept whatever comes out and then fix it, or even, like I said before, planning that we'll fix it after it goes out. That's just a huge failure in leaderships, in the leadership there to allow something like that to happen, in my opinion. And so, speaking very passionately about what I like to do, which is, and I love cleaning up data. I love finding issues. I like picking things apart. It's something that you have to be in the role that I'm in. But to look at business requirements in a very early stage, right? You can't come in at the very last minute and test a bunch of things and say, oh, it looks fine. That's how it's traditionally been done. I didn't see any problems. This is the implementation person or the development person, I did all my unit testing. I see it in dev, and some things are showing up there. I see some props and evars and events or whatever, or the code's on the page, and I see the pixel firing. It's a lot deeper than that. You need to have full context. For the QA person, really needs to be there to ask why. Why are you collecting this? What is this prop for? How does it relate to the reporting? Because I'm looking at things from end to end. I'm looking at from the click all the way through the reporting, making sure that everything there is solid. There's no issues. Again, I'm not just looking in one browser like a developer might do. I'm not just looking at Chrome or Firefox. I'm looking at it in multiple browsers. Lots of times I'm looking at it on actual devices rather than emulating and things like that. So we can actually see at that point what the user sees and follow the trail all the way through reporting. And that's really how it needs to be done to do it right. Of course, you can employ a little bit of automation in there as well. That comes a little bit with a cost in terms of the actual software that you need, and also in terms of time. So to automate something takes time. And in this day and age, something I'm sure we also need to talk about is Agile, right? So Agile, we've gone from quarterly releases or monthly releases to, let's release it every Tuesday or every Wednesday. And when you get into that, you almost have to have your own separate practice with your own QA person that's doing nothing but asking why, sitting in meetings, gaining context, and being able to actively participate in the life cycle of analytics.
I'm debating if I should pull open a notebook because now I have like a million follow-up questions and I know I'm not going to be able to keep them all straight in my head. But let me ask the one that's kind of burning, and I'll maybe remember the others that I had. I'm really glad that you brought up the point of being part of the project lifecycle. It's something, and honestly, I didn't even think about it, and I'm kind of ashamed to think of to say that from a QA perspective, but it's something that I've been passionate about for a long time, that this needs to be a joint team effort, and we need to make sure everyone has context through the life of the project. And we see it a lot with companies that are saying, we've made these huge investments, we're not getting any value. I go in there and I look at their processes and I see their new implementation get spun up, and I'm like, where are the analysts? Why aren't the analysts in the room with your implementer to make sure that they're talking about what they need? We get to the end of a project and we're like, why is QA just getting the spec 2 days before we go to production? Like, this is crazy, right? So being a joint team, and sure, there'll be different times throughout that life cycle where you do more or less heavy lifting, but we need to stop looking at it as these separate units that we just plug in at certain points in the life cycle. They're all integral parts of making this work, and they need to be informed from the beginning and throughout if we're going to expect this to work at the highest levels. I guess that's more of a statement than a question.
I totally agree with you.
So to that point, one of my follow-up questions was, what would you say to organizations, and you mentioned being able to set these expectations with leadership of investments that they need to make in people? If you follow me on social, it's something I'm constantly hammering, that we need to do more in investing in people. Right now, we're seeing quite the opposite. We're seeing teams shrink and shrink and shrink. And now we're going to go to our leadership and say, oh, by the way, we need a dedicated data quality person. Not only data quality, but they need to know the business, they need to know the technology, they need to know it all. And they're going to be expensive, but they're going to more than pay for themselves. How are you talking to organizations about, why we need that? Because it's needed, but we now have this uphill fight where now we have less people, less money available, and we expect to do more.
Well, you could start with, what's the cost of bad data quality, right? There's a ton of information out there. If you're making business decisions based on bad data, faulty data, then you're you're going to be sunk at some point. It's really a matter of, if you don't do it, it's going to bite you at some point. It's a necessary thing. And investing in people, you don't have to always be the data guy, right? I've rarely just been the data guy, maybe 2 or 3 times in the dozens and dozens of engagements that I've participated in. Sometimes I do a little project management or engagement management or some analysis. It's important to be able to work in consultancies as someone that is able to swap hats around a little bit. Now, I'm kind of talking my way out of being the data guy in, being hired as that data guy, but I would contend that everyone should be a good project manager, from the C-suite all the way down to the junior analyst. It behooves you to be able to have project management chops. It keeps you on top of your game. It allows you to run your own practice. Like for me, when I was running the data quality practice, I knew where I needed to be at a particular time. If I was working with other folks, I knew where the milestones were. If we had deadlines, maybe things changed around, I had to be there to say, well, you realize that if you move the date back a week, you can't keep the code, an extra week. I'm going to need the 2 weeks that we've already slotted in to do the QA, where the quiet code hits, where we have time to create use cases and test plans, which you mentioned, you alluded to just a minute ago, Jason, where you said QA's inserted at the last minute. If you're only coming in and looking at whatever you can find before it goes out, you're doing it wrong there as well. There needs to be some sort of test plan. There needs to be use cases in place. Furthermore, you need to make sure that you save your artifacts from those tests, because if you don't have that and somebody comes along later and says, why didn't you catch this? If you're caught there with your pants down, where you can't prove that it was actually, when I looked at it, this is what it looked like. These are the artifacts. If you can't prove it, it never happened.
Yeah, no, I like that. So with that in mind, and with the idea that we're constantly being asked to do more with less, you mentioned software. This is such a critical piece that I don't think this is something you can just fully automate with software. It's not something that I would feel comfortable turning over to like a Mechanical Turk or just an offshore team and say, crank through this. But as an expert in the space, do you find that there are tools available to you that help make you efficient, that you can use to automate pieces or provide efficiencies in your practice, looking at data quality?
Sure. I mean, you can employ simple Selenium scripts to run through, say, a sales funnel or something like that, where if you have to do something over and over, signups, registrations, things like that, assuming that you have already worked with some front end folks where they give you dummy data, which is critical. If you have to actually sign up every time as yourself, obviously you won't be able to do that. So there are a few prerequisites around using automation, any automation. It could be Observe Point or some similar tool like that, Data True, for instance. You need to be able to reliably add those credentials, go through and robotically go through some flow, right? Or the scanning options that those two tools have and some other tools have as well are very valuable to look at the number of tags on pages and the presence of tags on pages. Those are things that, if that's all you need to do, those tools are fantastic. That's what they should be used for. Now, what they shouldn't be used for is critical path testing prior to a release going out. You want to make sure that you're looking at that in all your different browsers. You're not relying on, dropping it into an automation tool that only uses one browser, that only looks for 2 or 3 different, prop CVARs and maybe an event. You want to look at everything. You want to look at everything holistically. You want to look for JavaScript errors, console errors, issues, within maybe the tag manager has, some errors. There's all kinds of issues that you'll need to look through. And that's a lot of manual slogging around within your tools. And I use everything from Charles to Fiddler. I use Data Slayer. I use the Observe Point plugin. Google's got a few as well. There's, the Observe Point, or I'm sorry, the Adobe tool as well, the debugger, console itself, network tab, however you need to use it. And you need to be fluent in all the different browsers as well. We need to talk at some point about the browsers, the coming browser issues that we're going to have in the next few.
So let me ask you one more question, and then we can pivot there, because I do have a follow-up question on technology, and I'm interested to see if you see what I see, and if so, what your theory is on, in the digital analytics space. We tend to leverage tools specifically for our space. So an Observe Point, a HubScan, or you mentioned each of the vendors tend to have their own debugging and testing solutions. Lesser so on the more maybe what I would call traditional QA solutions or monitoring solutions, like you mentioned Selenium, maybe a New Relic, or others in that space. Do you see something similar, and do you have a theory on why we tend not to adopt some of those more proven solutions that other parts of the organizations would use for their automation and QA?
No, and that's a fantastic question. I see ultimately us moving towards, chaining ourselves up to the engineering teams, for instance, that are using automation frameworks to be able to hitch a ride with them, maybe slow their things down that they're doing, because everything there is just super fast. They're only looking at functionality. They're looking that pages are firing. There's no errors on the pages. There's, they look for console errors and issues and, with timing and things like that. But lots of times, as you know, with tag management and MarTech in general, there's, synchronous, asynchronous loads. There's, we need to wait for DOM ready, and engineering usually doesn't care about any of that. So there are some challenges that we would need to kind of solve at that point. But I definitely see some sort of bolting on of a tool to help with validation of pages in a much larger way. Maybe even completely automated at some point, where you've got Windows services, or you've got some sort of proxy set up on your PC or a pixel that's being fired, that's being captured and interrogated by some database with a rules engine that is looking at the actual what should be on the page versus what is being added to the page. But still, even then, you've got to go into your Adobe or your Google Analytics and validate that the reporting's there. You need to make sure that you're not getting double beacons or missing beacons, or beacons are fired out of sequence, or you've got a you've got a track, right, instead of a page view. There's a track link. There's so many items that you need to keep in focus as you're testing, that I don't really see, to your point, being able to leverage those larger teams very easily. I think it's going to take a pretty concerted effort by a pretty good team or a good tool to realize that.
Yeah, no, I love that insight. Okay, so let's pivot to browsers, and I'm not sure where you want to start or what you want to pick on, but browsers is such a huge topic. From a data quality perspective, the obvious is all of the different rules that are now in play, and you have browsers kind of flexing their muscles at what you can and can't do. But even down to the most simplistic thing, especially in a lot of the things we do in optimization testing, being able to QA across browsers is so critically important. It's rarely done. And we go into lots of organizations, and the term we've come up with is spoiled tests, meaning we've spun up a test in Optimizely or Adobe Target or fill in the blank of your favorite testing tool. It looks great. We've tested it on Chrome. We launch it. The analyst comes in and says, well, wait a minute, something's going haywire here on Firefox. We go and look at it and like, our experience is totally messed up in Firefox. Why didn't anyone test it? Why didn't anyone test it on Safari for mobile? And it's a huge ask and undertaking. So anyway, I'm not sure where you want to go with browsers, but it's something that's constantly on my mind, specifically thinking about optimization. And it's a lot to do, but when the investment's done right, you get data you can trust. What scares me is companies are not putting in the investment. They're fooling themselves that they trust the data, and they're making decisions based on some very, very limited testing where just pulling back the covers a little bit will show, well, wait a minute, you made a decision where this data is spoiled. It's clearly not what you think it is.
Correct. Yeah. That's where the use cases, the test plan, and everything else ahead of time. One of the questions I always ask is, which browsers are we testing this in? Which devices or operating systems or whatever iOS are we looking at? That does, if you have 4 or 5 browsers and 2 or 3 different devices to test, it does make it take longer to test. But to your point, it's the right way to do it, and it's the way that you catch the issues before they make it into production. And also, to your point, the Firefox issue that you just the issue that you just referenced there, I've got my artifacts. It happened because I tested it, and I can show you screenshots or Charles sessions or whatever at that point to show you that it was indeed firing. But there's so many different things that you need to test, the reasons why you need to test different browsers, with all of the changes that are coming to browsers, third-party cookies and first-party cookies, security issues and plugs and things like that that these browsers are doing. There's sites out there that help you understand where we are currently, but I don't think they even know where they're going ultimately. They keep putting out dates and they keep moving the dates, and folks in the industry are left guessing a lot of times. It really, for that reason, makes it more important that you're testing all of the things in all of the browsers all of the time. If you're not, then you should be.
So 2 follow-up questions to that. One, how do you stay up on it? As you mentioned, like there's so much in flux with the different browsers. It doesn't seem like there's any real consolidation between them as far as what's in play, what's not, what rules are valid versus what not. And then the second question is, how do we test across all those browsers? And is it feasible, or are you looking, or are you advising clients to look at the data and say, well, let's at least prioritize and look at your top X percentage of traffic by browser, by version, and we'll focus there? What's kind of your strategy when it comes to that?
So in order to keep up on things, it's reading blogs, it's reading, some of the key influencers, in the space, staying up to speed, Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that. I've got in my emails, I have some some alerts set up for Chrome and Firefox and Edge and all the different browsers, iOS and Android and everything else in place to be able to try and stay abreast of those. The cookies as well. There's a lot of folks, thought leaders out there that I follow to get that information. Also, the folks that I work with, I ask questions. If I'm on the phone and we're talking about some cookie issue, while we're waiting for 5 minutes ahead of a meeting or after a meeting, I may pick their brain about it. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of really smart people. So, look at those folks and ask those folks direct questions around it and figure things out. I've also got a lot of really good friends in the industry, and, don't stay idle. Always be looking for the changes that are coming.
So one of the questions that I have is, what advice would you have for organizations or specifically people within a data or a digital data role for validating data outside of web? Because I think as complex as that is, the complexity ramps up when we start to move outside of that. And I think a lot of us are just kind of throwing our hands up and say, it's just too hard. So maybe we'll validate in-app or we'll validate the data afterwards. So I'm talking about things like, once we move outside of traditional web and we go to even mobile web, I find it very, very difficult to debug and validate data streaming on a mobile device. But then we move into mobile apps. Maybe I have an app on an Apple Fire, and how do I validate that? What would you give as far as direction for organizations to start to get smarter around doing data validation outside of just traditional web?
Okay, so previously, the last question I didn't answer ahead of this. I'll kind of fold these two together. In looking at issues with different browsers and trying to figure things out, also with non-web testing, iPhones and the like, you can look at, if you're using, and you should be using dev suites or properties, you can look at what the testing looks like, just as a real high level on, is the data coming through, right? You can look at your SDR, which should be fantastic and should be up to date and should tell me all the different things.
Should, but probably.
I'm qualifying all of my statements just for future reference. We can go back and dig into these later. Make sure that you know what should be on mobile web, right? That a lot of times there's specific things that should be on mobile that aren't on desktop, and you as the practitioner that have all the context, that's asked all the questions, the whys during the meetings and everything else, should have all of that pretty clearly in your mind when you're testing, so that you can go into the report suite, the property, and you can look for those variables and see that they are indeed being captured. I guess you could probably use ObservePoint or DataTrue or HubScan, one of those tools as well, to go in and kind of ferret out some of those same variables to see if they're not present. So you can really kind of dial those things in using the reports or using those tools to give you a quick and dirty of whether things are there or not. And then from the SDR, and hopefully from either previous use cases and test plans or current ones, if you've got things that are sunsetted or added, you'd be able to go in and look for those specific variables that should or should not be there. That's really it. I mean, if you've got, if you're testing TVs, smart TVs and things like that, I've actually, I think it's been a while, but I've actually run an emulator or simulator on one of those as well. I forgot where I found it, but I found a tool online. Take it with a grain of salt, whether it's going to work or not. But in the future, you're going to be able to, proxy those things through Charles, Fiddler, one of those tools, and do the same thing. You mentioned Amazon Fire. I'm not familiar with what you were. Have you tested using Amazon Fire before?
I haven't. I was doing a workout on my Amazon Fire TV, and I'm like, I imagine there's a lot of data streaming through this. I'm wondering how they're validating it.
Right.
So, yeah, I haven't personally though. So, but I know it's there.
Like on my, I've got a smart TV. It's not an Apple TV. I probably should get one, but there's no way to get into the proxy there. Otherwise, you just chain it to Charles and see what you get, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a way to do it though. But all the non-web stuff that's out there, tablets and phones and the like, you can easily chain it up through Charles and see all the traffic that's going through there. And that's actually the right way to do it. There are emulators, so you can use Xcode, which is an actual, you're actually running the device on your Mac. Then there's a ton of different Android emulators as well that you can use, where you can actually see all the items there, the errors and the variables and whatnot.
I like to imagine you have some kind of a virtual testing lab set up where you have different setups and emulators and OSs and browsers. Like as a data quality person, I imagine that's critical to have all of that organized in some way. What's your setup so that is efficient to be able to test across different browsers and OSs and emulators? Is it something you set up unique for each experience, or do you have kind of a base setup? Well, this is my testing lab and these are my tools I have available.
Well, I've done it a bunch of different ways. I've worked with companies. One company that was really smart built their own tool, and I worked with them a little bit on that. They had some offshore resources that actually built a Selenium grid setup and a front end on it where they could actually spin up actual sessions. So they could replay the sessions across different actual devices. That was back in 2014. So it's been a minute for that, but they did it right. And it was fantastic. It was a fantastic thing to be a part of. But virtual machines, so you can do virtual PCs, easily running Charles and all of your browser tools that you use and things like that. So virtual PCs, I've had different PCs with different operating systems. So I could run, an older version of IE, for instance, different versions of Chrome. And then you can use, I hate to use them, but you can use emulators. So you can emulate on Chrome, you can emulate on Edge, different browsers. Not the right way to do it because you've got the JavaScript running through, it's not the native JavaScript engine. It really just depends on how in depth you need to get with a client and speaking with them. The last client I was with, they're setting up their own QA lab to some specifications that I helped them with using.
Yeah, I think that would be extremely valuable for every company. I think there's a huge value to someone like you coming in and saying, hey, let me help you set up your lab, virtual or otherwise. I don't know what the current state of things are. And when my only real experience with it, so I started my career out working in IT in the early 2000s, and we had a literal physical lab. Like you would walk down the hall into this room and it had Macs and PCs and all these different computers with different configurations. And we would literally sit at them and test our software on each of these different computers. I'm sure it's much more virtual now. And maybe again, the traditional QA teams have a view of how to do that. I think we can all say from experience that MarTech teams don't. I think there'd be huge value for someone like Eric coming in saying, hey, let me help you set up your virtual lab. At least give you the right setup and tools so you can do this the right way.
Absolutely. So we worked with Browser Stack a little bit as well. Browser Stack using real browsers. There's a bunch of different ways to go at it. It really depends on how in depth the company wants to go. If they want to test on all the current browsers, or if they want to go back a few versions, that's when you start getting into, I guess the easiest way would be virtual PCs. So you can just keep a PC that's a couple months back and not update it and just maintain that. But yeah, I've been where you were back in the early 2000s. There was a lab that we set up at a telecom company here, and we had all the PCs with all the different operating systems and whatnot with Norton Ghost back in the day, where you'd reset it and you'd have a fresh PC for UATs. We did a lot of UATs that
Yeah.
way.
Jim, jump in.
Yeah, Jim.
No, I've just been enjoying listening. So I caught myself just kind of going with the flow and not actually preparing any questions. But Eric, there was something we briefly talked about. So like, okay, let's hold off. Let's not talk anymore about it until we actually talk for real. And I'm the type of person that like analogies. I like to talk in analogies, but then also analogies help me make like the abstract, much more tangible and real. And one of the things that you and I talked about, like the analogy you like to use is analytics is the caboose. You think of the project, whatever you're deploying as a train, analytics is the caboose, and QA is the caboose trailer hitch. So, I mean, like that's something like I wrote that down. Like it's a great analogy. And like, what made you think of like why is that? And what have you seen that really,
Well, if you're talking about
solidifies that for you
in general, where analytics is a piece of that project, unfortunately, we see all the time that analytics is probably the first thing that gets chopped. If you have to hit a deadline, if there's a drop dead date of August 1st and things get squashed towards the end, the first thing to go invariably is analytics. It's a backwards way of thinking, because as soon as it goes out, somebody wants to know, how's it going, and what are the insights we can gain, and all the other things. Well, I don't know. We chopped analytics off the end, right? So analytics is at the very tail end of things, right? So hence the caboose. And then the hitch on the back of the caboose would be QA, because QA has always been kind of like, we're the janitor. We're the guy that comes and cleans things up and makes sure things are as good as they can possibly be. But QA for functionality QA is way ahead of even analytics. Analytics can take a back seat to functional QA most of the time. So analytics QA has to happen after the analytics group goes in and does their thing. The implementation folks and the dev folks all get their stuff together. QA goes in, and it's a race at that point. You have to run as fast as you can, find all the things, report all the things, fix all the things, retest all the things. So there are these iterative loops, and those are the things that, as a data integrity person, I have to keep in focus. And that's what drives me in the conversations with leadership is, okay, you realize, there's 2 weeks at the end of this process. So let's use July 14th in this hypothetical example where we have a release on the 1st upcoming. If you're going to push that out to where we're going to get it a week ahead of time, I'm going to need to push it out to August 8th to get all of the things done that I need to get done. If you're changing things within, new functionality, or the project plan changes in some way, maybe they cut something out, they add something, that will necessarily affect analytics, and that will necessarily affect the project plan that I have, the use cases and the test plan that I have. So the iterative loops at the end where I'm able to test, devs are able to fix, or implementation's able to, do whatever to fix whatever issues that are out there. If I plan for 3 iterative loops to get clean data by the end of the cycle, if those get compressed to 2, or God forbid 1 or none, which happens, the messaging needs to be crystal clear to the leadership. There's a risk, there's a huge risk at this point. We're not going to be able to certify all of the things that you want certified because you're not giving us the amount of time. And that needs to be talked about way ahead of July 14th or whatever date we're on. That needed to be talked about in February or March, right? When we're leading up, we're talking about working on the project. It needs to be something that is in scope with leadership, that they sign off on and they agree to. If not, again, I use this a lot. If not, you're doing it wrong. Sorry, you hit a really passionate point from you there.
Yeah. So
No.
the follow-up I have to that is, and I can pretty confidently say all 3 of us have been through a situation where either we got the short end of the stick on testing, raised the concern before launch, but still got the short end of the stick, or raised issues that we found, and one way or another issues went to production. Management, leadership, they want insights immediately after launch. There's issues, they yell and scream, and we say, well, we raised concerns here, here, and here. Things still went to production. We got the short end of the stick on testing. And it's kind of like, I've had that conversation multiple times in postmortems. Like, if QA wasn't cut short, if testing wasn't cut short, if the issues I raised 4 weeks before launch were addressed, we wouldn't be here. Why don't we learn our lesson? Why do we have that conversation over and over again, even though like it hits leadership's radar when that project goes live and there's issues with the data that they want to see about?
Well, great question, and you're preaching to the choir here. I think it's important to have a very good relationship with the leadership and to let them know way ahead of time, in order for this to go smoothly, in order for this to be successful, we need buy-in. We need you to be 100% on board here. That should be, in the governance discussion that you're having, that you should have a governance, by the way, that you're having, it needs to, the buy-in needs to be there, that if QA is not done and not done in accordance with the way that it should be done, you're not going to have clean data. You're not, well, I should say you're not guaranteed clean data. Sometimes you can get lucky. I know there's devs out there that think that they never make mistakes, and implementation folks that never forget to, turn in a proper NEVAR on. It happens though. Not calling any names, but it does happen, right? And it's something that has to be talked about. It's something that we should learn from, we don't learn from, but needs to be elevated in the conversation ahead of time. I'll just leave it at that.
So let's wrap this up with a 2-part question. The first part is, when thinking about data quality, what's something that you see that lots of organizations aren't doing? And I want to stay away from using low-hanging fruit or quick wins, but what's something relatively low level of effort around quality that organizations aren't doing, but would create a huge amount of value when it comes to data quality? That's question 1. And then let's wrap it up with question 2. What are your thoughts on, or what do you see in the future when it comes to data quality?
Okay, things that companies aren't doing. It's kind of going back to a previous point. They aren't treating QA and data quality as its own practice. Last company I worked for, we made quite an impact with the clients that we had, and we were able to really lock them down in terms of long-term strategy, which really helps. If you're with a company and you have a lot of context, you're able to be a trusted advisor, a trusted partner, and become part of their team. So over time, you can see data quality become better. You can pull them along the maturity curve to the point where they're running for themselves, and then you can run with them. That's a fantastic feeling, and I was able to do it a lot of times, setting things up and kind of walking off into the sunset, so to speak. That's something that I think we should have more organizations doing. They should just pay more attention to things rather than treating it as an afterthought, as you mentioned first, Jason. And what was your second question? I'm sorry. Can you?
What do you see what do you see in the future? What does the future hold when it comes to data quality?
Yeah, future. I mentioned it a little bit as well in terms of more automation. I see more automation, but done correctly. It needs to be very well thought out. You need to work with different teams. That's going to take your data quality and QA folks having their own practice, having a seat at the table, making sure that they have full context of everything that's going on, and are able to provide some advice to those other teams in terms of how they can help scale the amount of work that needs to be done. Agile's gonna take over. We're gonna have releases every Tuesday and Friday.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. In the future, it's gonna be so much faster. And as we've already mentioned, the browsers are always going to be a problem. So we're going to need to move towards multi-browser testing in an automated way. All the different tools that are out there that have gaps there, we'll need to address those in the future in order for them to be, something that can be part of the overall solution, and also chain those up to the frameworks, as I mentioned before, that engineers are already using.
Yeah, awesome stuff, dude. This has been an amazing conversation. Really appreciate you joining us. You've shared a ton of valuable knowledge, and my hope is that everyone listening to this, and we have listeners at all different levels of organizations and different backgrounds and different roles. I'm hoping that everyone will take this and use this as an opportunity to have the conversation within their organization about taking data quality more seriously, because we all can. Every organization out there can up the game when it comes to data quality. I hope this helps spark some conversation. So I appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing some extremely valuable insights.
Had a great time. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.